I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. And I'm joined now by a fresh face, San Antonio Express News sports reporter Tom Orsborn. Tom, great to have you here on the program for the first time. You recently spent some time in Baltimore working on a story about Spurs forward Rudy Gay and how much he gives back to his hometown community, which you can now read at expressnews.com/Spurs. Just look for the article called "With His Health Restored and a Friend by His Side, Gay predicts Spurs will exceed expectations." So we're going to get to all that, and I'm sure some things that you couldn't include in the article. You know, you have your word limits. But first off, Tom, before we get to all that and everything Rudy Gay, how did you snag that sweet assignment?
Well, Chance, it was kind of a twofold assignment. The story that's on expressnews.com now is kind of just him discussing where he's at basketball-wise and his impressions, reactions to various moves that the Spurs made this offseason. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to run a much longer, comprehensive look at how much he's given back in terms of community outreach and charitable work to his hometown of Baltimore. So, I just pitched the story to our editors. I thought it was a story that needed to be told. I mean, here's a guy who's deeply, deeply committed to helping out his hometown, and Baltimore certainly needs it. It's been well chronicled, the difficulties they've had with poverty, crime. In 2017, they set a per capita murder record for the city. It's a city that desperately needs rays of sunshine like Rudy has produced. And I just thought it was a story that needed to be told, and our editors agreed.
All right. Well, tell me about this story that you researched in Baltimore.
Rudy has a foundation called the Flight 22 Foundation. And among the things that foundation has pulled off in recent years, they built a playground in one of the most impoverished, bleak areas of Baltimore in 2015. They've donated food to needy families at holiday time. Rudy also holds a annual basketball tournament that showcases East Coast teams and players. And that's why I went up there this past weekend, is because that tournament was going on. It was a perfect opportunity to really see him at his best as far as charitable work goes. And then finally, they have a new endeavor, Chance, that he's unveiling soon, where he is going to team with a digital company, an online company, to help fund business opportunities for youngsters in Baltimore that want to learn about going into the world of business. So he's really committed to all of this. And the neat thing about it, his entire family's involved. I was very fortunate and very grateful to have met his mother, Miss Ray, and his father, Rudy Sr., and his sister Yasmin, who holds a executive position with Flight 22 and really does a lot of work when Rudy's tied up with the NBA, with the Spurs season. So just a great family, really wonderful in terms of giving back. They're very community oriented. Rudy's mother, Miss Ray, she was the coordinator of Head Start in Baltimore for many years. And he picked up a lot of his giving back from his mother. His grandfather, who helped raise him, was also a very giving, caring person. The whole family is that's just what they do. They're a family of doers and a family of givers. And it was really a pleasure to get to know them.
Sometimes what I love to focus on, Tom, are kind of the stories behind the stories, or maybe just in this case, you'd say the logistics. So how did this work out? Did you just show up and then Rudy Gay was like, oh, it's the Express News? Or like, do you contact him and let him know that you're going to be there to try to give him a heads up, make sure that you have time to talk? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I I knew about this basketball tournament, and that really was the avenue to get into the story. So when I pitched the story, I told our editor at the time, Jim Lefkoe, that they're having this tournament in August. It would just be a great opportunity to fly in and spend about 3 days tops reporting the story and then fly out. And once I got that green light from Jim to do that, and a couple of other editors here at the Express News, I contacted the publicist for the basketball tournament, Rudy's publicist. They loved the idea, and they kind of set it up with Rudy. They coordinated a time that I could interview him. But really, that wasn't needed. Rudy was more than gracious with giving me time, as were all of his members of his family. So, yeah, it's a process for any kind of story about that. You've got to make it. You've got to pitch it. You've got to try to sell your editors on the need to do the story and the bang that you can get for your buck. In this case, we got 2 stories out of it. And then also you've got to coordinate things with the players' publicists and people, let them know that you're going to be hanging out and get the green light from them as well. So that's kind of the behind the scenes thing. It's not like you just get these things done very easily. It's a process, and this one worked out well.
And then something that I loved reading about in this first of what you mentioned are 2 stories from this trip to Baltimore from San Antonio, for both you and for Rudy Gay, the guy we're talking about now, really appears to be healthy. After that Achilles tendon injury from January of 2017, he's slimmed down a little bit. Tell me about his health.
Yeah, Rudy blew out his left Achilles tendon in January of 2017 when he was with the Sacramento Kings. Devastating injury. Remarkably, for a guy 31 years old and who had that kind of serious injury, he was still able to come back and play for the Spurs last season. He didn't miss any time. He got to camp on time. Started the season off well, and then reality kind of set in. It was a really valiant effort that Rudy was giving, and he played well, averaging 11.5 points, second on the team in scoring. But with that kind of injury, it's just you're never really 100% that first year back. And we saw that in terms of Rudy going through a lot of pain. And then about midway through the season in December, his right heel, he had some serious problems with that, which sidelined him for about 2 to 3 weeks. So he was never just really 100%. And for a player like Rudy, that's a tough thing because he's an athletic guy. He plays at a high level that relies on his athleticism. So he never really felt right. So it was very key and very good for Spurs fans to hear Chance that he's 100% now. The quote that he gave me was, "Everything's clicking. I'm feeling athletic again." He spent the summer in between a lot of charity commitments and commitments that he had with the NBA. He played in the NBA's Africa game. Between all that, he worked out hard. He was in the gym. He was in the weight room. He was determined to lose some weight so there wouldn't be so much pressure on his feet and ankles. He pulled that off, losing about 5 pounds. And he's just in great shape. He looked really, that struck me immediately when I saw him Saturday at the tournament in Baltimore. It immediately struck me, this guy's lost weight and he looks really good. And sure enough, Rudy confirmed that was the case.
And boy, how refreshing is it to hear about a Spurs player who was injured, was able to play, and stayed with the team. Holy crap.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Rudy talked a little bit about the post Kawhi Leonard era and how he's just so happy to have that drama behind him and how the whole team, knowing who they've got this year, who's going to be there, no fears about, hey, are they going to trade this guy? When's he coming back? Yada, yada, yada. They should have a drama-free season, at least from the start. And no drama can compare with the drama that went through last year. So he's really stoked about the season, and and having that drama put to rest and having a fresh start for the entire team.
Yeah, that was something that really came across in this article that once again, you can check out at expressnews.com/Spurs. And something that Gay seemed to be upset with was that, yeah, I mean, this next season, from everything that you think you're going to be able to say confidently about it, it's not going to have all the drama of last season. Yet Vegas odds not favorable for the Spurs, and Rudy did not appreciate that. He does not agree with those odds.
Absolutely. Westgate Sportsbook in Las Vegas placed the over and under for the Spurs win total this year chance at 43.5. And Rudy was just shaking his head like, hey, you know what? We've got two all-stars, LaMarcus Aldridge, and then the guy they traded, the centerpiece of the trade with Leonard, DeMar DeRozan, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes about his great friendship with Rudy. You know, you've got those two all-stars. You've got some up-and-coming young players in DeJounte Murray, who was second-team all-defense last year. Derek White, the rookie last season, who should make a great leap this year in terms of his role. You know, you've got Rudy finally healthy. The additions of Marco Bellinelli, which solves a lot of the Spurs' three-point shooting woes. Pau Gasol, of course, coming back. Patty Mills. I agree with Rudy. It doesn't. I'm not saying they're going to win 60 games or anything like that, but 43.5 seems a little low. I definitely would take the over on that, and I think they're going to get close to 50 wins and make the playoffs.
So you already mentioned it. Let's not waste any time. DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, apparently they're on the phone 3 times a week. There's a good relationship there.
Yeah, Rudy and him are great friends. They got to know each other, mid-2000s when they were on a NBA trip to China where they were thrown together for about 2 weeks. And then Rudy was traded 2007 to Memphis, and from Memphis to Toronto. He teamed up with DeRozan there, and they just became thick as thieves. I mean, really good friends. As Rudy said, he's as close to being a brother to me and being blood to me as you can be. And they're just really fond of each other. They have similar personalities. They don't want the limelight. They don't want the accolades. They don't want the attention. They just like to play basketball, get the job done, and keep things low key. They both have a subtle sense of humor. Like to laugh, like to joke around without getting into the foolishness, as Rudy put it, that some NBA players, or as some of Rudy's family told me, some of the foolishness other NBA players get into. They're serious, but at the same time, they keep things in perspective. Just a really good mix, these two guys. And, with the problems they had last year with team chemistry, with all the drama surrounding Kawhi, it'll be refreshing to have guys that are really cohesive and really playing as a unit because they like each other.
Now, to take a step away from Rudy Gay, I mean, this is basically the Rudy Gay episode of the Spurs Insider, but, there are a few things that we can talk about, and, we'll come back to Rudy here in a moment. The other side of that trade, you got DeMar DeRozan, got another player from the Toronto Raptors, finally been getting some attention, even from Charles Barkley.
Yeah, Jakob Poeltl, native of Austria, 7-foot center, young kid, a former first-round 9th overall draft pick by the Toronto Raptors. Poeltl does a lot of things right, and as Charles Barkley pointed out, he's one of the most underrated players in the NBA. The kid with the Raptors was called on to do the quote-unquote dirty work, which he really enjoyed. He said, "I'm not afraid to do that. I enjoy doing it, setting screens, crashing the offensive boards, protecting the rim, setting guys up with entry passes and so forth." He likes doing that stuff, and he did it very, very well. Really, really strong inside presence. And like I said, an up-and-coming, near outstanding rim protector. And he sets punishing screens, does those things very well. But he wants to advance to that next level, and everyone thinks he can do it. And now he's on a team, Chance, that has arguably the best player development staff in the NBA. They're known for that. They developed so many great young players. Most recently, we saw what they did with Jonathan Simmons. So it seems like a great marriage. This young guy with a lot of talent and this team that really knows how to develop young talent. So I look for big things from him. He's coming to the Spurs, right now, appearing to be in a backup role to Pau Gasol, but he does a lot of good things that Pau does not do. And that's not to denigrate Pau. Pau does a lot of good things that Jakob doesn't do. But the Spurs need a guy that's strong in the pick and roll, something Pau isn't. Pau's more of a shooter and a facilitator. So I wouldn't be surprised, Chance, if Jakob gets a lot of playing time and perhaps starts as the season progresses.
And then finally, Tom, before we go back to Rudy for our final thoughts, some unfortunate news, big news. Former Spurs GM Bob Bass passed away this last Friday.
Yeah, Bob Bass, age 89, was with the Spurs for 20 years, from 1974 to 1994. I had the pleasure of covering him back in the 80s and the 90s and getting to know him pretty well. Really, really instrumental in the Spurs getting to where they are today. They made 17 playoff appearances during Bob's 20 years with the team. He's the guy who moved George Gervin, 6'9" George Gervin, a really revolutionary move, moving him from forward to shooting guard, which was unheard of in those days to have a guard that big. It paved the way for guys like Magic Johnson and Clyde Drexler, the bigger guards. So Bob's, you can't write the history of the NBA without mentioning that. And that's Bob's legacy. But also with the Spurs, he pulled off some huge trades. Traded for Larry Keenan in the early 70s, traded for Terry Cummings, and drafted Sean Elliott at the same time that they signed David Robinson. You add all that up together, they had some really good teams in the 1990s. And Bob also, as a coach, in addition to moving Gervin to shooting guard, he also took the Spurs, who in their first season in San Antonio played a very defensive-oriented, boring type of game under Coach Tom Nasalke. Bob, when he became coach in 1974, he implemented an up-tempo type of game, a passing game, high-scoring game that unleashed the talents of George Gervin, James Silas, and Larry Keenan. That turned into the type of basketball that brought fans out in droves and was really instrumental in the Spurs gaining a foothold here in San Antonio. So, yeah, Bob passed away after a series of strokes. Really down-to-earth guy who did a lot in terms of getting the Spurs where they are today, and he'll be missed.
And so, of course, someone who is so fundamental in a time for the Spurs that has long since passed. Now let's bring it back for final thoughts on not only current day Spurs, but the future with Rudy Gay, talking about DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl. Let's finish up. Final thoughts on Rudy Gay. Obviously, you spent some time with him recently.
Yeah, I expect Rudy to have a really good season. I think he'll score again at right around the clip that he did last year, probably a little bit better. His stamina will be better. His explosiveness will be better. He'll give them a great scoring punch off the bench to complement DeRozan and Aldridge. I just like this team. I'm very excited about seeing what they can do with all the angst and turmoil gone from last year. And as Rudy pointed out, they've all got chips on their shoulders. We know DeRozan does because he was angry that he was traded from the Raptors. He's not angry at all about being with the Spurs. It's a great opportunity for him, but he loved Toronto. He was the face of the franchise there. He had made it into a great home, and he had received assurances that he was going to stay put. And lo and behold, they traded him. So he's angry. He wants to stick it to the Raptors with a great season. As Rudy pointed out, LaMarcus Aldridge always has a chip on his shoulders. DeJounte Murray has a chip because he wants to prove he's one of the great young point guards in the game. And then Rudy wants to prove that he's completely healthy and can regain the form that he showed earlier in his career with Memphis, Toronto, and Sacramento. So should be a fun season with a lot of guys that are determined to show what they can do and to step out of Kawhi Leonard's shadow and get continue the Spurs legacy of excellence.
Absolutely. Going to be an interesting season. And boy, wait till those Toronto, San Antonio games.
Yeah.
Oh my, that's going to be a good time. Well, Tom, great reporting. Great to speak with you. Thank you for sharing what you've gathered from spending so much time at Baltimore with Rudy Gay, and as you mentioned, his family. There's going to be another, this was a two-parter trip, so there's going to be another report that's going to appear in the San Antonio Express News. But for now, you can go to expressnews.com/Spurs and read this first of two reports on Rudy Gay. So, Tom Osborne, great speaking with you, and let's have you on the podcast again.
Chance, it's my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
And a tremendous thank you to San Antonio Express News sports reporter Tom Osborne for joining me for today's episode of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.